101 doctors failed to cure Mafia boss's son, but the brilliant daughter of a cleaning lady saved him. When 101 doctors gave up hope, the son of a ruthless Mafia boss was on the brink of death, until a brilliant, overlooked daughter of a cleaning lady stepped in and changed everything. Before we go into details, click subscribe, like and comment where you're watching from. I would be glad to know this story goes as far as Canada, all of the United States of America, Australia, Africa, and even the United Kingdom. So let me know where you're watching from on comment section. I pray may the good God Almighty bless and preserve you all and your family. Amen. Let's begin. The rain hammered against the bulletproof windows of the Salvatore mansion like desperate fingers seeking entry. Inside, the empire that Giovanni Salvatore had built with blood and cunning was crumbling. Not from rival families or federal investigations, but from something far more devastating. The slow, agonizing death of his only son Marco Salvatore lay motionless in the king-sized bed that had been converted into a makeshift hospital room. At 17, he should have been full of life, preparing for his future at the helm of the family business. Instead, his once athletic frame had withered to a shadow, his olive skin now the color of old paper, his breathing shallow and labored. The monitors surrounding his bed beeped a monotonous rhythm that had become the soundtrack of Giovanni's nightmare. "Mr. Salvatore, I'm afraid there's nothing more we can do." Dr. Harrison Chen, the 101st specialist to examine Marco, stood with his shoulders slumped in defeat. A world-renowned neurologist from Johns Hopkins, he had spent 3 days running every test imaginable. The deterioration of his nervous system is unlike anything in medical literature. It's as if his body is attacking itself in a way we simply cannot identify or stop. Giovanni's massive hands clenched into fists. At 52, he was a man who had never accepted defeat. His dark eyes, which had made grown men confess their betrayals, now glistened with unshed tears. "You're telling me that in the 21st century, with all our technology, all our knowledge, you cannot save my boy?" Dr. Chun shifted uncomfortably. He had treated presidents and princes, but the desperation in this crime lord's eyes was something that transcended social boundaries. "I've consulted with colleagues in Berlin, Tokyo, London, and Singapore. We've run genetic panels, immune studies, toxicology screens, everything. Whatever is affecting Marco operates on a level we don't understand. I'm sorry." The word sorry echoed in the vast room like a death sentence. Giovanni turned away, his shoulders shaking. Behind him, his wife Gabriella sat in a chair she hadn't left in 3 days, her designer clothes wrinkled, her usually immaculate hair in disarray. She clutched a rosary with hands that trembled, whispering prayers that seemed to evaporate into the cold air. "Get out," Giovanni whispered, his voice cracking. "All of you, get out." The medical team filed out silently, leaving the Salvatores alone with their dying son. In the hallway, they passed the security detail. Hard men with harder eyes, who stood helpless before an enemy they couldn't intimidate or eliminate. The mansion, a palace built on power and fear, had become a mausoleum of broken dreams. Downstairs, in a small utility room most of the family never noticed, Elena Reyes wrung out her mop and tried to ignore the tears streaming down her face. At 45, she had worked as the mansion's head cleaner for 12 years, arriving before dawn and leaving long after the family had retired. She had watched Marco grow from a mischievous 5-year-old who would leave her drawings to thank her for her work, to a kind teenager who, unlike his father's associates, always said please and thank you. She had been cleaning the hallway outside his room when Dr. Chun delivered his verdict. The words had pierced her heart. Elena knew what it was to love a child. Her own daughter, Sophia, was 23 now, brilliant and beautiful despite the poverty they had endured. But she also knew the particular agony of watching the innocent suffer. "Mama," Sophia's voice came from the doorway. She had come to pick up her mother after her shift, as she did every evening. At 23, Sophia Reyes possessed an unusual combination of striking beauty and fierce intelligence. Her long dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she wore jeans and a simple sweater, but there was something in her bearing, a quiet confidence, a sharpness in her dark eyes, that made people take notice. Elena wiped her eyes quickly. "Mija, you're early." Sophia stepped into the room, her medical textbooks tucked under one arm. She was in her final year of medical school at the state university, working 2 part-time jobs while maintaining a perfect GPA. I heard about Marco. The staff were talking. They said the doctor gave up. Elena nodded, fresh tears falling. That sweet boy. It's not right, Sophia. He's younger than you. He has his whole life ahead of him. Sophia set down her books and embraced her mother. Over Elena's shoulder, her eyes narrowed in thought. For the past 3 months, she had been secretly reading everything she could find about Marco's condition. Not out of morbid curiosity, but because a pattern had been nagging at her brilliant, analytical mind. The symptoms described in hushed conversations among the staff, the fragments of medical reports she had glimpsed while her mother cleaned the study, the progression of the illness. Something about it didn't fit the standard diagnoses. Mama, Sophia said slowly, do you remember what I told you about my thesis research? Elena pulled back, confused. Your paper about environmental toxins? What does that have to do with everything? Sophia interrupted, her mind racing. Mama, I think I know what's wrong with Marco, and I think I know how to save him. The next morning, Elena Reyes did something she had never done in 12 years of service. She asked to speak with Giovanni Salvatore directly. The request alone was so unprecedented that it took 3 hours and the intervention of the head of security before she found herself standing in Giovanni's private office. Her hands twisted nervously in her apron. Giovanni sat behind a massive oak desk, his face haggard, his expensive suit rumpled. He looked like a man who had aged a decade overnight. When Elena entered, he barely glanced up. Rosa said you needed to speak with me. Make it quick. Elena's voice shook, but she forced herself to speak. Mr. Salvatore, it's about Marco. My daughter. She's in medical school, and she thinks she knows what's wrong with him. Giovanni's head snapped up, his eyes suddenly sharp and dangerous. Your daughter? A medical student? I've had the best doctors in the world examine my son. What could a student possibly? Please, Elena interrupted, a boldness born of desperation overcoming her natural deference. Just listen to her. What do you have to lose? The question hung in the air. Giovanni stared at this woman who had cleaned his home for over a decade, whose name he barely knew, and saw in her eyes the same desperate hope that was eating him alive. He reached for the phone. Bring her. Now. 2 hours later, Sophia Reyes stood in the same office, her heart pounding but her voice steady. She had brought her laptop, her research notes, and most importantly, her conviction. Giovanni sat across from her, flanked by his most trusted advisor and the family physician. All 3 men looked at her with a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. You have 10 minutes, Giovanni said flatly. Convince me. Sophia opened her laptop and began. For the past 3 months, I've been researching a rare form of heavy metal poisoning for my thesis. The symptoms include progressive neurological deterioration, immune system dysfunction, and cellular degradation that mimics autoimmune disease. It's so rare that most doctors never encounter it, and standard toxicology screens don't detect it because the compound breaks down into innocuous elements within 72 hours. Dr. Voss, the family physician, scoffed. Heavy metal poisoning? We tested for everything. Lead, mercury, arsenic? Not everything, Sophia interrupted, pulling up a molecular diagram. Not thallium-mercury complex, or TMC. It's a synthetic compound that was developed in Eastern Europe in the 1990s as an assassination tool. It's virtually undetectable because it mimics natural cellular processes while slowly destroying the nervous system. But it leaves a signature, a specific pattern of cellular damage that I believe matches Marco's pathology. She pulled up side-by-side comparisons. Marco's test results, which she had pieced together from overheard conversations and glimpsed reports, alongside published case studies of TMC poisoning. The patterns were identical. The room fell silent. Giovanni leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the screen. Where would someone get this compound? That's the problem, Sophia admitted. It's not commercially available. Someone would have had to specifically synthesize it or obtain it through underground channels. But Mr. Salvatore, the important thing is, if I'm right, Marco can be saved. There's a chelation protocol that can bind the compound and allow it to be excreted. But we're running out of time. Once the damage to the spinal cord reaches a critical threshold, it becomes irreversible. Dr. Voss shook his head. This is speculation based on incomplete information. We can't risk experimenting on the boy. Experimenting? Sophia's voice rose, her fear giving way to anger. You've given up on him. What risk could possibly be greater than letting him die? I'm proposing a targeted treatment based on solid research. Look at the data yourself. Giovanni raised his hand for silence. He studied Sophia for a long moment, taking in her passionate intensity, her obvious intelligence, the fire in her eyes that reminded him of himself at her age, before power had corrupted that clarity of purpose. Your mother said you're in your final year of medical school, he said quietly. Top of your class? Yes, sir. And you believe, with absolute certainty, that this is what's killing my son. Sophia met his gaze without flinching. I can't promise absolute certainty, but I've analyzed every piece of information I could gather, and the probability is over 90%. The symptom progression, the treatment failures, the pattern of deterioration, it all fits. And if I'm right, we have maybe a week before the damage becomes permanent. Giovanni stood and walked to the window, staring out at the manicured grounds of his estate. Behind him, he could feel Dr. Voss preparing objections, could sense his advisor's concern about legal liability. But all he could think about was Marco's face, growing paler each day, and the sound of his wife's desperate prayers. If you're wrong, he said without turning around, my son dies. If I do nothing, Sophia replied softly, your son dies anyway. Giovanni turned, and Sophia saw something in his eyes that terrified and moved her. The look of a man who had nothing left to lose. Then you'll start treatment today. But understand this, Miss Reyes. If you're wrong, if this harms my son, there's nowhere on earth you can hide from me. Sophia felt her mother's hand grip her shoulder, felt the weight of the threat and the promise she was making. But when she spoke, her voice didn't waver. I understand. Now let me see Marco. Every hour matters. The medical suite that had been set up in Marco's room now became Sophia's laboratory. Giovanni had spared no expense, procuring equipment overnight that most hospitals couldn't afford. But Sophia knew that expensive tools meant nothing without the right knowledge to use them. She stood beside Marco's bed, looking down at the teenager she remembered as a little boy. He was unconscious now more than awake, his body too weak to sustain normal consciousness. His mother, Gabriella, sat in her usual chair, watching Sophia with eyes that held both hope and suspicion. Mrs. Salvatore, Sophia said gently, I need to explain what I'm going to do. Marco is being poisoned by a compound that's destroying his nerve cells. I'm going to administer a chelating agent that will bind to the poison and help his body eliminate it. But the process will be difficult. His symptoms may get worse before they improve as his body processes the compound. Gabriella's hand flew to her mouth. Worse? How can they get worse? The chelation will pull the toxin from his tissues, which means there will be a temporary spike in his blood levels before his kidneys can filter it out. He may have fever, pain, possibly seizures. But if we don't do this, the toxin will continue destroying his nervous system until there's nothing left to save. Tears streamed down Gabriella's face. Elena, who stood in the corner, came forward and took the other woman's hand, a gesture that, in any other circumstance, would have been presumptuous. But grief had stripped away the barriers of class and status. In this room, they were just two mothers watching children suffer. You'll stay with him? Gabriella whispered. You won't leave. Sophia squeezed her hand. I'll be here every minute. I promise. The first injection of the chelating agent went into Marco's 4 at 2 p.m. Sophia had calculated the dosage meticulously, adjusting for his weight, the severity of his symptoms, and the estimated concentration of toxin in his system. Now came the hardest part, waiting. For the first hour, nothing changed. Marco's vital signs remained stable, his breathing unchanged. Sophia monitored every reading, her trained eye-catching minute fluctuations that the standard monitors missed. Giovanni paced the room like a caged animal, unable to sit, unable to look away from his son's face. At hour 2, Marco's temperature began to rise. By hour 3, he was burning with fever, his body shaking despite the cooling blankets. Gabriella cried out, But Sophia's voice cut through her panic. This is expected. His immune system is responding to the mobilized toxin. We need to keep him hydrated and monitor his kidney function. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, adjusting drips, checking lab values that were being drawn every 30 minutes, making minute adjustments to her protocol. Dr. Voss, who had remained as an observer, stepped forward. His fever is 104. This is dangerous. And stopping now would be fatal. Sophia shot back. The process has started. If we halt the chelation, the mobilized toxin will cause massive organ damage. We have to see it through. She turned to Giovanni. Your son is a fighter, Mr. Salvatore. His body is strong. Trust him. Trust the process. Night fell and the vigil continued. Elena brought coffee and food that no one touched. The security team stood silent guard outside, these hardened men uncomfortable with their helplessness. Inside the room, time seemed to stretch and compress simultaneously. Minutes felt like hours as they watched Marco struggle. Yet the night passed in a blur of medical interventions and whispered prayers. At 3 a.m., Marco began to seize. His body convulsed, monitors shrieking alarms. Gabriella screamed, but Sophia was already moving, administering anti-seizure medication with steady hands despite her racing heart. She had prepared for this possibility, had every contingency planned. Come on, Marco, she whispered as she worked. Come on. You're stronger than this poison. Fight. The seizure lasted 90 seconds, an eternity for those watching. When it finally stopped, Marco lay still, his breathing ragged but present. Sophia checked his pupils, his reflexes, running through her neurological assessment with the precision her professors had drilled into her. His brain activity is good, she announced, relief evident in her voice. The seizure was a response to the toxin being processed, not new damage. We're through the worst of it. But Giovanni, watching his son's chest rise and fall weakly, wasn't convinced. How can you be sure? Sophia pulled up Marco's latest lab results on the monitor. Look at this. His kidney function is improving. The toxin is being eliminated. His inflammatory markers are coming down. His body is healing, Mr. Salvatore. Slowly, but it's healing. As dawn broke over the Salvatore estate, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Sophia allowed herself a moment to step out onto the balcony. Her body ached with exhaustion, her mind fuzzy from the adrenaline crash, but beneath the fatigue was something else. Hope. Elena joined her, wrapping a blanket around her daughter's shoulders. You should rest, Mija. Even for an hour. I can't. Not until I'm sure he's stable. Sophia turned to her mother, and Elena saw in her face the woman her daughter had become. Strong, brilliant, unbreakable. Mama, did you know? When you asked me to help, did you know what you were risking? Elena smiled sadly. I knew, but I also knew that you were born for this. Not just the medicine, but the courage to act when others wouldn't. Your father, God rest his soul, he always said you had a healer's heart. I see it now. They stood together in the growing light, mother and daughter, cleaner and medical student, two women who had dared to challenge fate. Inside, Marco Salvatore continued his slow journey back from the edge of death, unaware that his life had been saved not by wealth or power, but by compassion and brilliance born in the humblest of circumstances. On the third day of treatment, Marco opened his eyes. It was just afternoon, and Sophia was adjusting his fore when she saw his eyelids flutter. She froze, barely breathing, afraid to hope. Marco? She whispered. Can you hear me? His eyes opened fully, unfocused at first, then gradually sharpening. He looked at her, confusion evident in his expression. His lips moved, but no sound came out. His throat was too dry, his body too weak. Sophia grabbed a cup of ice chips, carefully placing one on his tongue. Don't try to talk yet. You've been very sick. Just squeeze my hand if you understand me. His fingers twitched against hers, a weak pressure that nonetheless felt like a miracle. Sophia's eyes filled with tears, but she forced herself to stay professional. She needed to assess his neurological function, to understand how much damage had been reversed. Marco, I'm going to ask you some questions. Squeeze once for yes, twice for no. Do you know your name? One squeeze. Do you know where you are? One squeeze. Do you remember what happened to you? Pause, then two squeezes. That was expected. The poisoning would have affected his recent memory. That's okay. You're going to be fine. I'm going to get your parents now. When Gabriella entered the room and saw her son's open eyes, she collapsed. Giovanni caught her, and together they rushed to Marco's bedside. The crime lord, who had never shown weakness in front of anyone, fell to his knees beside his son's bed, openly weeping. Marco, my boy, my precious boy. Marco's hand moved, weakly gripping his father's fingers. His voice, when it finally came, was barely a whisper. Papa. What happened? Over the next hours, as Marco slowly regained strength, Sophia continued her treatment protocol while monitoring every system in his body. The improvement was remarkable. His kidney function normalized, his inflammatory markers plummeted, and most importantly, his neurological responses began to return. The sensation in his legs, which had been almost completely gone, started to come back. The weakness in his arms improved daily, but Sophia knew they weren't out of danger yet. The chelation had removed the toxin, but 3 months of progressive damage had taken a toll. Marco would need intensive physical therapy to regain full function. And there was another question that gnawed at her. Who had poisoned him, and were they still a threat? It was Giovanni who finally asked the question Sophia had been dreading. They were in his office, 5 days after treatment had begun. Marco was now sitting up in bed, eating solid food, and speaking in full sentences. The transformation was nothing short of miraculous. How did you know? Giovanni asked, studying her intently. How did a medical student diagnose what 101 specialists missed? Sophia chose her words carefully. Because I wasn't looking at Marco as a collection of symptoms. I was looking at the whole picture. The specialists were each focused on their area of expertise, neurology, immunology, genetics. But I had the advantage of distance. I could see patterns they missed because they were too close to the details. That's not all of it, Giovanni pressed. You specifically targeted a rare poison. Why? Sophia met his gaze steadily. Because the progression didn't make sense for any natural disease. It was too consistent, too deliberate. Someone wanted Marco to die slowly, in a way that would look like an undiagnosable illness. The question you should be asking, Mr. Salvatore, isn't how I figured it out. It's who did this to your son. The temperature in the room dropped. Giovanni's eyes went cold, the compassionate father disappearing behind the mask of the crime lord. I've been asking myself that question every hour since you explained the poisoning. Someone in my organization, someone with access to my home and my son, tried to murder him. And when I find them, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Sophia felt a chill run through her. She had saved Marco's life, but in doing so, she had set in motion events that would have deadly consequences for someone. Mr. Salvatore, she said carefully, I need you to understand something. Marco is getting better, but he's not fully recovered. The chelation removed the toxin, but his nervous system has been damaged. He needs months of physical therapy, possibly years of follow-up care. And if he's exposed to even trace amounts of this compound again, it could be fatal. You need to find the source of the poisoning, not just the person who administered it. Giovanni nodded slowly. You're right, and I'll need your help. No one else can test for this poison. No one else will know what to look for. Sophia hesitated. Getting further involved with the Salvatore family was dangerous. She had already crossed lines she never imagined she would. But when she thought of Marco's smile that morning when he had successfully held a spoon to feed himself, she knew she couldn't walk away. I'll help, she agreed. But on one condition, no violence in front of Marco. He's been through enough. Whatever you need to do to find the person responsible, you do it away from him. Let him heal without being surrounded by revenge. Giovanni considered this for a long moment. You're protecting my son from me. I'm protecting your son's recovery. Stress and trauma could set back his healing significantly. He needs peace right now, Mr. Salvatore. He needs to remember what it feels like to be safe. Something shifted in Giovanni's expression. You care about him, not because of who I am or what I can do for you. You genuinely care. I do, Sofia admitted. He's a good person. He always has been. When I was younger and my mother would bring me to work sometimes, Marco would share his books with me. He'd ask me about school. He treated me like a person, not like I was invisible. That kind of kindness is rare, especially in... She trailed off, suddenly aware of what she had been about to say. Especially in my world. Giovanni finished for her. You're right. It is rare. And it's precisely that kindness that makes Marco unfit to inherit my empire. But it's also what makes him worth saving. The investigation into Marco's poisoning moved with the efficiency that only a criminal organization could muster. Giovanni's men questioned everyone, examined every delivery, traced every person who had access to the house. But it was Sofia who found the crucial clue. She was in Marco's room, helping him with physical therapy exercises, when she noticed something odd. On his nightstand was a bottle of the vitamin supplements he took daily, had taken daily for the past 6 months, right around when his symptoms first began. Marco, she said carefully, who gave you these vitamins? He looked at the bottle, his brow furrowing. Uncle Antonio. He said they would help me stay strong for football. Sofia's blood ran cold. Antonio Salvatore was Giovanni's younger brother, his second in command, the man who had been by Giovanni's side for 30 years. She unscrewed the bottle cap and examined the tablets. They looked like ordinary multivitamins, but she needed to be sure. Marco, I need to borrow these, just for a little while. That evening, she took the vitamins to her university lab, accessing it with her student credentials. She worked through the night, running every test she could think of. And there, dissolved into the coating of each tablet, she found it, thallium mercury complex. Not enough in a single dose to cause immediate symptoms, but taken daily over months, a perfect slow-acting poison. The hardest part was telling Giovanni. She stood in his office again, this time with the test results, and watched the most powerful crime lord in the city fall apart. Antonio, he whispered, his face ashen. My brother. Why? Sofia had been thinking about this question. Mr. Salvatore, I can't claim to understand your family's dynamics, but I can tell you this. Marco was poisoned starting 6 months ago. What happened 6 months ago? Giovanni's hands clenched. I announced that Marco would be my heir, that when he finished college, he would take over the family business. Antonio, he always thought he would be next in line. He has 2 sons of his own who are in the organization. But I chose Marco because Marco is better than this life, Sofia said softly. Because you hoped he could transform the family into something legitimate. And Antonio saw that as a betrayal. The silence that followed was profound. Finally, Giovanni spoke, his voice barely audible. He's my brother. We've been through everything together. How could he poison my son? Ambition does terrible things to people, Sofia replied. The question now is, what are you going to do about it? What Giovanni did was unexpected. Instead of the violent retribution Sofia feared, he arranged a meeting, Antonio, himself, and Sofia, in the same office where this had all begun. Antonio arrived smiling, unaware of what had been discovered, greeting his brother with the casual ease of 3 decades of partnership. Giovanni, what's this about? I was in the middle of... He stopped when he saw Sofia, his eyes narrowing. The cleaning woman's daughter. Why is she here? Sit down, Antonio, Giovanni said, his voice flat and cold. Something in his tone made Antonio pause. He sat slowly, his expression wary. Giovanni slid the vitamin bottle across the desk. Tell me about these. Antonio glanced at the bottle. Marco's vitamins? What about them? Tell me about the thallium mercury complex you dissolved into each tablet. Tell me how you spent 6 months slowly poisoning my 17-year-old son. The color drained from Antonio's face. His eyes darted to the door, where two of Giovanni's most loyal men stood guard. He was trapped, and he knew it. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, but his voice shook. Sophia stepped forward, placing a folder on the desk. "These are the lab results. The compound in these vitamins matches exactly with the toxin I chelated from Marco's system. The formulation is specific. It had to be specially synthesized. That kind of work requires contacts, money, and planning. It wasn't impulsive. You've been trying to kill him for 6 months." Antonio's facade crumbled. His shoulders slumped, and when he looked up at his brother, his eyes were filled with a mixture of defiance and despair. "You chose wrong, Giovanni. You always did. Marco is soft, weak. He cares about things like honor and morality. He would have destroyed everything we built within a year. My sons, they're strong. They understand this world. They deserve to lead. So you tried to murder my child," Giovanni said, each word falling like a stone. "Your nephew, a boy you watched grow up. You sat at my dinner table and watched him suffer, watched his mother cry, and you said nothing. I thought the doctors would give up sooner." Antonio burst out. "It was supposed to look natural, impossible to treat. But then this girl," he gestured dismissively at Sophia, "she figured it out. She ruined everything. Again," he would say, sweat pouring down his face as he tried to walk the length of the parallel bars in the therapy room they had set up. "I need to do it again." Sophia would watch him, ready to catch him if he fell, marveling at his resilience. "Marco, you need to rest. You've been at this for 2 hours. "I've wasted 3 months dying," he would reply. "I'm not wasting another day being weak." It was during these therapy sessions that they really talked. Marco asked Sophia about her life, her dreams, her experiences growing up poor in a city that worshipped wealth. She told him about studying by candlelight when the electricity was cut off, about her father's death from a treatable illness because they couldn't afford the medication, about her mother's endless work to give her opportunities. "That's why you became a doctor," Marco said one afternoon, sitting in the sunroom where they had moved for a change of scenery. "Not for the prestige or the money. For your father. For everyone like my father," Sophia corrected. "For every person who dies because the system failed them. I can't save everyone, but I can save some. And sometimes that has to be enough." Marco was quiet for a moment. Then, "Sophia, can I tell you something? Something I haven't told anyone? Of course. I don't want to be what my father is. I don't want to run the family business. I never have. But I didn't know how to tell him without breaking his heart. He's built this empire, and he wants to leave it to me like it's a gift. But to me, it feels like a prison sentence." Sophia took his hand. "What do you want, Marco? If you could do anything?" "I want to be a teacher," he said quietly. "History, maybe, or literature. I want to work with kids who are like you were, smart and ambitious but without advantages. I want to show them that there's a different path than what their circumstances dictate. But how can I tell my father that? Especially after everything that's happened." "You tell him the truth," Sophia said firmly. "Marco, your father loves you. I've watched him this past month. He didn't hire 101 doctors because of pride. He did it because losing you would have destroyed him. He doesn't want you to inherit a criminal empire. He wants you to live. And if living means being a teacher, then that's what he'll want for you." "You think so?" "I know so. But you have to give him the chance to understand. You have to be brave enough to tell him who you really are." That conversation set in motion a reckoning that the Salvatore family desperately needed. One evening, after Sophia had gone home and the mansion was quiet, Marco called his father to his room. Gabriella was there too, sitting in her usual chair, her rosary ever present in her hands. "Papa, Mama, I need to tell you something," Marco began, his voice steady despite his nerves. "I've been given a second chance at life, and I can't waste it living a lie. I don't want to take over the family business. I never have. I want to be a teacher. I want to have a normal life. I know this isn't what you planned, but..." Giovanni held up his hand, stopping his son's words. To Marco's shock, his father's eyes were filled with tears. "Marco," Giovanni said slowly, "do you know why I really wanted you to lead the family?" Marco shook his head, confused. "Because I hoped you would end it. Not the legitimate businesses, but the rest. The things I've done that I can never take back. I thought if I handed everything to you, someone with a conscience and a good heart, you would find a way to transform it all, to make it clean. But Sophia helped me understand something. I was asking you to sacrifice your life to fix my mistakes. That's not a gift. That's a burden. And you've carried enough burdens." Gabriella reached for both her son and husband, pulling them into an embrace. "My beautiful boy," she whispered, "all I've ever wanted was for you to be happy and alive. If teaching makes you happy, then teach. We have enough money for 10 lifetimes. You don't need to inherit anything except our love." Marco broke down then, 18 years of pressure and expectation releasing in racking sobs. His parents held him, and for the first time in months, perhaps years, the Salvatore family was truly together, not as a crime dynasty but as a family bound by love rather than obligation. 6 months later, the Salvatore mansion had transformed in ways both visible and invisible. The medical equipment was gone from Marco's room, replaced by bookshelves stuffed with literature and history texts. Marco walked with only a slight limp now, his strength nearly fully restored. He had enrolled in the local university's education program, determined to earn his teaching credentials properly. But the biggest change was in Giovanni himself. True to his word, he had begun the slow process of legitimizing the family business. It wasn't easy. Decades of criminal enterprise couldn't be unwound overnight, but he was trying. Several of his legitimate businesses were expanding, while the darker operations were being systematically shut down or sold off. His associates grumbled, but none dared question him. The man who had nearly lost his son had found a new purpose, building something his son could be proud of. Sophia had completed medical school with highest honors, her tuition paid as promised. She had been accepted to the most prestigious residency program in the country, but she had chosen instead to stay local, to serve the community that needed her most. Giovanni had kept his promise there too, funding her clinic in the poorest part of the city, a place where anyone could receive care regardless of their ability to pay. On the day of the clinic's grand opening, the entire Salvatore family attended. Marco cut the ribbon alongside Sophia, both of them laughing as photographers captured the moment. Elena stood to the side, tears streaming down her face, as she watched her daughter achieve dreams that had once seemed impossible. "You did this," Giovanni said quietly, coming to stand beside Elena. "You raised an extraordinary daughter. You should be proud." Elena wiped her eyes. "I am, Mr. Salvatore, but I didn't do it alone. You gave us the chance. Not many people in your position would have listened to a cleaning lady's plea. Not many cleaning ladies would have had the courage to make that plea," Giovanni countered. "And Elena, you don't work for me anymore. You're family now, whether you like it or not." Inside the clinic, Sophia was giving tours, explaining her vision to the gathered crowd. There were exam rooms equipped with the latest technology, a pharmacy that could provide medications at cost, a laboratory for running basic tests. But more than the equipment, there was a philosophy. Everyone deserved to be heard, to be taken seriously, to receive care with dignity. "This clinic exists because one person refused to give up," Sophia told the assembled crowd. "Because Marco Salvatore fought for his life, because his parents loved him enough to listen to an unlikely source, and because sometimes the most important medical breakthroughs come not from expensive specialists, but from someone who cares enough to see what others miss." Marco, standing beside her, squeezed her hand. In the months of his recovery, their friendship had deepened into something neither of them had expected: love. It had grown quietly, in stolen moments during therapy sessions, in long conversations about books and dreams, in the shared understanding of two people who had walked through darkness together and emerged changed. "Speech!" someone called from the crowd, and Marco blushed but stepped forward. "6 months ago, I was dying," he began, his voice clear and strong. 101 doctors examined me, the best in the world, and they all gave up. But Sofia Reyes, a medical student with nothing but her brilliant mind and her compassionate heart, saw what they couldn't. She saved my life not because of what she could gain, but because she believed every life was worth fighting for. This clinic represents that same belief. No one will be turned away. No one will be told their life isn't worth saving. And if I have anything to say about it, this will be the first of many clinics like it across the city. The applause was thunderous. Giovanni, watching his son speak with such passion and purpose, felt his heart swell with pride. This was who Marco was meant to be. Not a crime lord, but a voice for the voiceless, a champion for those society forgot. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Sofia found herself alone in her new office. She sat in the chair behind her desk, looking at the diploma on the wall, the medical equipment waiting to be used, the appointment book that was already filling up. She thought about her father, gone too soon, and hoped he could see what she had accomplished in his name. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Marco entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "I thought you might need this. It's been a long day." "A good day," Sofia corrected, accepting the cup. "Marco, I still can't believe this is real. My own clinic. The ability to actually help people." Marco sat across from her, his eyes warm. "You were always going to help people, Sofia. With or without my father's money. With or without this clinic. It's who you are. Maybe. But this makes it easier. I won't have to choose between paying my student loans and buying equipment. I can focus on what matters, the patients." "Like you focused on me," Marco said softly. "Sofia, I need to tell you something. These past 6 months, getting to know you, watching you pursue your dreams while helping me reclaim my life, I've fallen in love with you. Completely, irreversibly in love with you." Sofia's breath caught. She had felt it too, the growing connection between them, but had been afraid to acknowledge it. Their circumstances were so unusual, their worlds so different. "Marco, Wait," he interrupted gently. "Before you say anything, I need you to understand something. I'm not my father's heir anymore. I'm going to be a teacher making a teacher's salary. I can't offer you mansions or private jets or any of the wealth you might expect from a Salvatore. All I can offer is myself, flawed, still recovering, but completely devoted to you." Sofia felt tears slip down her cheeks. "Marco Salvatore, do you really think I care about money? I fell in love with a sick teenager who thanked me for every injection, who fought through pain without complaint, who dreamed of teaching kids from circumstances like mine. I fell in love with your kindness, your courage, your refusal to give up. The wealth, the name, the family legacy, none of that matters to me. You matter. Just you." Marco crossed to her side of the desk and pulled her to her feet. When he kissed her, it was gentle and sure, a promise of all the tomorrows they had almost lost. Outside the office, Elena and Gabriella stood together, watching through the window with matching expressions of joy. "Our children," Gabriella whispered. "Look at them, Elena. So happy." "They're good for each other," Elena agreed. "They understand what really matters." Giovanni joined them, and for a moment, the 3 parents stood together in comfortable silence. Finally, Giovanni spoke. "Elena, Gabriella, I've been thinking. This clinic is just the beginning. What if we did more? What if we started a scholarship fund for students like Sofia, brilliant kids who just need a chance? What if we used our resources to create opportunities instead of—" He didn't finish the sentence, but they understood. Instead of building a criminal empire, he wanted to build something that could actually change lives. "I think that's a beautiful idea," Elena said softly. "And I think Sofia and Marco would be the perfect people to help run it." Epilogue. 5 years later, the lecture hall at Central City University was packed with students, all eager to hear from the guest speakers. Professor Marco Salvatore stood at the podium, his slight limp barely noticeable now, his confidence and passion evident as he addressed the crowd. "5 years ago, I was given a second chance at life," he began. "And I learned something crucial. Our circumstances don't define us. Our choices do. Yes, I was born into privilege. Yes, I had every advantage. But those advantages meant nothing when I was dying. What saved me was someone who refused to accept that my life was over, someone who chose to fight when everyone else had given up. He gestured to the side of the stage, where Dr. Sofia Reyes Salvatore sat, her hand resting on her rounded belly. She was 6 months pregnant with their first child, and the glow of impending motherhood made her even more beautiful. Dr. Reyes, my wife, grew up in poverty. Her mother cleaned houses. Her father died because he couldn't afford medication. She studied by candlelight and worked multiple jobs while maintaining perfect grades. She had every reason to be bitter, to be angry at a system that failed her family. Instead, she chose to become part of the solution. Today, her clinic has treated over 10,000 patients. The scholarship fund bearing our names has sent 200 students to medical school. And she's training a new generation of doctors who understand that compassion is just as important as competence. Sophia stood and joined him at the podium, accepting the microphone with a smile. Thank you, Marco. Though I think you're giving me too much credit. The truth is, we all have the capacity to save lives. Not just doctors, teachers, social workers, activists, even business leaders who choose to use their resources ethically. My students always ask me what makes a good doctor. And yes, you need to know the medicine. You need to understand pharmacology and anatomy and pathology. But more than that, you need to remember that every patient is a person with a story, with people who love them, with dreams that matter. She looked out at the sea of young faces, seeing in them the same hope and determination she had felt at their age. 5 years ago, I was just a medical student with a theory. I could have stayed silent. It wasn't my place to challenge the experts, right? A cleaning lady's daughter had no business questioning doctors from Johns Hopkins and Mayo Clinic. But I chose to speak up anyway. And that choice didn't just save one life, it changed the trajectory of dozens of lives. Marco went on to become an award-winning teacher. His father, Giovanni Salvatore, has become one of the city's most generous philanthropists. My mother, Elena, now runs a job training program for other domestic workers, helping them find paths to better opportunities. And I found not just my calling, but my partner in life. Marco wrapped his arm around her waist, and they stood together as the audience applauded. In the front row, Giovanni and Gabriella sat beside Elena, all three beaming with pride. Giovanni had transformed in the past 5 years. His legitimate businesses thrived, and he had become known not for his criminal past but for his charitable present. The Salvatore name, once whispered in fear, was now associated with opportunity and hope. After the lecture, as students swarmed them with questions and selfie requests, Sophia caught her mother's eye across the room. Elena smiled and touched her heart, their private signal for "I love you." Sophia returned the gesture, marveling at how far they had both come. That evening, the extended Salvatore family gathered for dinner at the mansion. But the formal dining room where business had once been conducted now rang with laughter and warmth. Marco's students' artwork decorated the walls. Sophia's medical journals were scattered across the side table. Baby items were already accumulating in preparation for the new arrival as they sat around the table, Giovanni and Gabriella, Elena and her new husband, the kind physical therapist who had helped Marco regain his mobility. Marco and Sophia, Giovanni raised his glass. "A toast," he said, his voice thick with emotion. 5 years ago, I was the most powerful man in this city, and I was powerless to save my son. I learned then that real power isn't about fear or control. Real power is about lifting others up, about using what you have to make the world better. Sophia, you taught me that. Elena, you showed me that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about speaking up even when you're terrified. And Marco, my son, you proved that the greatest legacy isn't money or power, but the lives you touch and the love you share. To family, Gabriella added, her eyes shining with tears of joy rather than the desperate tears of 5 years ago. Not just blood family, but the family we choose and the family we become. To second chances, Marco said, squeezing Sophia's hand. To fighting when everyone else gives up, Sophia concluded. To seeing worth where others see only obstacles. To believing that one person can make a difference. To all of it, Elena finished. to the journey that brought us here. They clinked glasses, the crystal singing in the warm air. Outside, the city sprawled in all directions, millions of lives intersecting, each with their own struggles and triumphs. And in one small clinic in the poorest part of town, a light stayed on late, where Dr. Sofia Reyes Salvatore's colleagues continued the work she had started. Saving lives, one patient at a time, with compassion and competence in equal measure. The story that had begun with desperation and ended with hope wasn't just Marco's story or Sofia's story. It was a story about the power of refusing to give up, about the courage to speak truth to power, about love that transcends social barriers, and about the ways unexpected heroes can emerge from the most unlikely places. 101 doctors had failed to save Marco Salvatore. But one brilliant young woman, armed with knowledge, compassion, and courage, had succeeded where they could not. And in saving him, she had saved not just a life, but an entire family's future, including her own. Years later, when Sofia and Marco's daughter asked how her parents met, they would tell her this story. They would teach her that privilege is a responsibility, not a right. That intelligence without compassion is empty. That love can bridge any divide. And most importantly, that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to give up on someone, because you never know whose life you might save or how that one act of courage might change the world. The cleaning lady's daughter had become a healer. The dying heir had become a teacher. The crime lord had become a philanthropist. And together, they had proven that redemption is always possible, that change is always within reach, and that sometimes, the greatest miracles come not from wealth or power, but from the simple decision to care. Deeply, fiercely, and without reservation. About another human being's life, sometimes the most extraordinary stories begin in the most ordinary moments. A mother's plea, a daughter's courage, and a family's desperate hope. This is a reminder that every life has value. Every person has potential, and every act of compassion creates ripples that extend far beyond what we can see. We are all connected by our shared humanity, and when we choose to see that connection, to honor it, and to fight for it, we become part of something greater than ourselves. We become healers in the truest sense of the word.